Hi everyone and welcome to Booktopia. My name is Lynette Noni and I am the author of the upcoming book The Prison Healer. But today I have the immense pleasure of speaking with the internationally renowned fantasy author Cassandra Clare, who is celebrating the release of her newest book, Chain of Iron, This Beautiful Beast, which is the second book in the Last Hours trilogy. So Cassie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
No, you are very welcome. I have a million questions for you, and I have no doubt that we're also probably going to tangent, so I'm going to jump straight in. I also would just like to warn people who are watching that because we are talking about this series that has already started, there may be a couple of mild spoilers for the first book. We'll endeavour to be as spoiler-free as possible, but just come in with that warning. So speaking of spoilers, Cassie, what can you tell us in the most non-spoiler way possible about Chain of Iron, the second book?
Ooh, well, it is hard to talk about without talking about the first book, but first book is about Cordelia Carstairs, who is a shadow hunter who shows up in London in 1903 because she believes her family needs to get her married to somebody powerful because her father is in disgrace, facing punishment from the Clave, and so they feel like if she marries someone who has, high status in the enclave, then she'll be able to get her father, rescued from prison and whatnot, and avoid the terrible disgrace of her whole family. And it's not as simple as that, as she discovers. And she comes to London. She starts to make friends with the people who are part of the enclave. And so she starts to make friends with the kids of some characters you may be familiar with if you've read the Infernal Devices, but it's okay if you haven't. So she befriends, she already has a best friend, Lucy Herondale, and Lucy has a brother, James, that Cordelia has been in love with most of her life. But upon coming to London, she's very startled to discover that James is in love with a girl that she has never known or even heard of before, named Grace Blackthorn. And James also has a motley crew of best friends. There's Matthew, there's Thomas, there's Christopher, and together they form the Merry Thieves, a group of rabble-rousing, hard-partying shadow hunters, if there is such a thing. And there's also other characters as well. There's Cordelia's brother, Alistair, who's always grumpy, but he does have a reason. And there's Anna, who is Christopher's sister and is one of my favorite characters. So Cordelia, of course, gets caught up in all of their shenanigans, and there is a series of demon attacks on interesting beeping noise. It's a series of demon attacks in London, and she gets caught up in, figuring out who's what's going on, what's with the mysterious daylight attacks, what's with these very deadly demons, and she discovers a whole bunch of things about herself and her friends. And Chain of Iron kind of continues that. There's a big thing that happens at the end of Chain of Gold, which I don't know if I should spoil or not, but I'm going to. So Cordelia and James get engaged not because they're in love, so to speak, even though she loves him, but because they need to save her reputation. And so we begin this book with Cordelia engaged to James, who she loves, but she thinks doesn't love her. And her father, she's succeeded in getting him out of jail, and he's returning, and that brings a lot of complications. And then someone is hunting and killing shadow hunters in the streets of London, Jack the Ripper style. So that is the big central mystery of the book that pulls in our main characters in the beginning.
Amazing. Well, I've just finished the second book, and I think you've summed it up very, very well without actually giving anything away. I'm also really, really, really annoyed at you about it, but we're not going to talk about it because everyone needs to read it.
Everyone understand what happens in the end. That's right.
Anyway, I just can't even talk to you right now. But I love that you touched on before, you mentioned that for people who've read the Infernal Devices, there are some familiar characters. I also love that you've made this series, you've made it so that people don't have to have read your previous books in order to launch into this one, which, is really clever, but also kind, because you do have a big backlist of books. And if people are like, oh, I am so overwhelmed here, where do I start? They can really start anywhere. But there's really something so beautiful about if you have read those previous books, because to me as a reader, it felt like, it felt like a bit of a warm hug, like I was being reunited with these characters who I'd previously fallen in love with, and now I'm seeing them, 20, 30 years onward. And so I guess I would love to know from your perspective as the author, how that felt to be able to revisit late Victorian, early Edwardian England with these characters who are clearly so precious to you and this world that you've already spent so much time in. What was your experience with that?
It was really fun. I mean, I was really happy to be able to go back to it because I really loved writing the Infernal Devices. And I like doing all of that research. I like reading, all of the Victorian novels and reading about the Victorian life and whatnot because I'm a big, history nerd. And so I really missed it, when I was done with it. And so I was really excited to be able to kind of go back. It's not the exact same time period, we're coming in 25 years after the Infernal Devices. And so the world has changed. And of course, the people from the Infernal Devices have changed. Will, Tessa, Jem, and their friends are all adults now. Yeah. And they have kids of their own. And it's really interesting to kind of come back and write them as parents. And I find that often in YA books, parents aren't just an obstacle. They're like something that you have to kind of get around so that your main characters, especially if you're doing, fantasy adventure, can have agency and can have control over the story. And, a YA story is not a good story if the main character's solution to the problems is going to their parents to have them fix it. Your protagonist got a protagonist. Yeah. So it was both fun to see them again and also a challenge to keep them out of the way because they're, like a lot of times we'll have dead parents, we'll have bad parents, absent parents, but these are very nice people. So I was like, man, they're really good parents. Really work hard to create situations where these kids have to be the ones who solve the problems and can't go to their parents, even though their parents are these nice people who would definitely want to help out if they could. So it was definitely both about, loving those characters, moving them ahead to be adults, and then also making sure that they stayed out of the way of the protagonists. So yeah, they're there, but they're not protagonisting.
Well, I think that was really what I wanted to really jump in on as well. I mean, what kind of pressure did you feel to remain faithful to these characters who you've already built, but give them enough time that readers would be satisfied, readers who already knew them would be satisfied, while also shifting them out of the way so that the next generation could be raised up to go on and do these things independently. Was that stressful and really difficult for you, or did it kind of happen organically?
It wasn't hard for me. It was hard to, like I said, to figure out how to, keep them in character and make sure, that they're these good and supportive parents while also keeping them out of the way. But it wasn't hard for me to keep them out of the way. And I was pretty mean. I mean, I was mean to my fans, and I apologize. Yeah. I wanted to be really clear going into the book that this was not a book about Will and Tessa and Jem. It's not about Cecily and Gabriel and Gideon and Sophie and whatnot. They are there, but they are very much background characters. This is a book about Cordelia and Lucy and James and Anna and the Merry Thieves, and they're the main characters. And so I felt like, I had to lay that down really clearly at the beginning of Chain of Gold and make it really obvious, these are your protagonists, these are the people, and these other characters are parents. And kind of the fun there is in, I hope, in seeing these people who we last saw when they were, 17 years old, who are now parents themselves. And there's a certain amount of amusement, I think, in visiting the trauma on these parents that they, once caused to the people who love them, because there's not a lot they can say to their kids. They're like, what, you're running around London, fighting with demons, getting in trouble. And they're like, yes, exactly like you did when you were 17. Yeah. They're like, oh man. Yeah. I mean, they really can't say anything. So it wasn't hard for me because I would, I fell in love with the new protagonists and I was excited about telling their story, but I was very strict about being very clear from the beginning of the book. These older characters, they're your background characters, but they're not the main characters.
Well, I think as a reader, I think you did it really well. And it was just nice to kind of see that, even 25 years on, yes, they had matured somewhat, but, the spirit of who they were still remained. Will was still just so Will, and it was just really nice, but to sort of see them grow up and to see that everything is okay, all right, everything is fine, and so that was really lovely. Moving on slightly, something you've always done really, really well in all your books, all the way back to the Mortal Instruments series. Actually, I would even say before that, I started reading your work back when you were writing the Draco trilogy as fan fiction. So I was like a teenager.
Five.
No, it was probably the first fan fiction I ever read. My best friend at the time, she just shoved it at me. She's like, you have to read this. I'm like, what is it? She's like, it's fan fiction. I'm like, what is fan fiction? And so you were kind of my introduction.
Yeah. That's really funny.
Oh, no, it was fantastic. And so something you've always done with all of your everything you ever write is you are so clever when it comes to injecting humor into your stories, whether it's a scene that is like humorous or quirky, or whether you are particularly talented at like a very well-placed one-liner. I don't know how you do it, but it is just like bam, out of nowhere, like you'll just do a startled laugh and you look around and be like, oh, did someone what just happened? But so I'm not going to ask you how you do that, because I feel like that's a bit like asking someone, how you breathe or how you fall asleep at night. But I would love to know, I guess, how you kind of balance the more serious moments in your books with those moments of levity, and why you think it's important to sort of add those kind of humorous bits in to sort of help break things apart.
Well, there's actually a great Mark Twain quote about humor that says explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You find out how it works, but the frog dies.
Yeah, I love that.
I know, it's really good. So I think that you're right. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I think I could explain like how to be funny. It's a really a matter of, timing and word choice and all of that stuff. And there are so many people whose work I've studied, who do write funny stuff. And it is always kind of a mystery. But I think it is important, at least for me, because I feel like this is actually how people deal with, difficulty and fear and trauma in real life, is they use humor and to balance, so we make jokes in the darkest time. And I think this past year has been a really good example of that. I mean, who among us has not joked about this terrible pandemic and said something, about like, well, I, guess that, I'm stuck inside for the next year, but at least I'll finally get to cut my own bangs. Which I have done, by the way, and looks terrible.
Oh, so no, it'll grow. Everything goes, and it doesn't look terrible.
I'm not really that wound about it. I'm like, there are a lot of people who have much bigger problems than having to cut their own bangs, so it's fine. But that's what I mean is like, we deal with the things in our lives that frighten us and that make us sad, and by joking about them, it is a way of defanging them, I think, and so. I like to write characters who do that because I feel like it's very human. And that also when we laugh with the characters, we learn to love them. There's nothing like, feeling like somebody has made you laugh or that you have a similar sense of humor to bring you to a place where you really like them. And I also think like we reveal things that are true about ourselves in the way that we use humor and the way that we joke around. So a lot of times the characters will be making a joke, but that joke tells us something about them.
Very true. And again, you do it so well, and it's just very perfect every time it happens.
I have a lot of really funny friends, so I tend to like steal the things they say when they're.
Oh, that's clever. I like that. Yep. So something else you also do very well, on top of humor, actually you do a lot of things very well, but your action scenes always seem fresh and new and exciting. And you've written so many books in this universe that I'm always curious how each new demonic battle or each new, high intense moment, how do you keep those fresh each time that you write them? Do you have like a formula, or do you just kind of immerse yourself in the scene and just go with it?
I mean, one of the fun things that I think is about writing these kind of battle scenes and whatnot, and about using sort of the topography of the cities that you're setting the books in. So for me, the city and the landscape of the city is always a really important part of the book. It's the urban and urban fantasy. And so if I'm writing like something in London, I'll walk around London and look at different locations and try to think about how you might have a fight there and how it would be, how you would stage it, how it would be different. So in this particular, in Chain of Iron, I don't think this is a big spoiler, there's a fight in a sailmaker's warehouse, which is, I saw an old sailmaker's warehouse when I was in Limehouse. And what's cool about the sailmaker's warehouse is that there are these giant hooks hanging from the ceiling that move. So I was like, wow, wouldn't it be cool to have a fight scene where people are grabbing these hooks and whooshing across the warehouse while, wielding their swords and whacking at demons and whatnot. So I think it's a lot of the location determine, they say like geography is destiny, and the location determine the nature of the fight a lot of the time. And man, learning to write fight scenes is very difficult. And it's a lot of, in the early days when I was working on this stuff, I had a friend who was a stunt coordinator for a TV show in LA. And so I spent a lot of time talking to him about like, how does these fights work? Like what kind of punches are you landing? Like when you're sword fighting, what are you doing? You know, how do the sword fights work? Where do you put your feet? Where do you put your hands? You know, that kind of thing. So I always say like fight scenes are a lot like love scenes. You have to spend a lot of time wondering where everyone's hands are.
Very true, and very good advice for any writers out there as well. Well, speaking of love scenes and speaking of love, I think we can all agree that all of your books have an epic romance in them, or multiple epic romances, and you really make it very difficult for your readers because there's a lot of heartbreak along the road to get there. But similar to the previous question, how do you make it so that with each new book, the new romantic pairing is something that's not something you've done before, or that it's tweaked, or that how do you make it so that readers invest so like heart and soul into each of your new pairings every time that you release a new book or series?
I mean, you always hope that they do, right? I mean, you do everything that you can. And for me, it's about, I always think like, what's the dynamic? Like, what is the dynamic between these two people? And, you know, the dynamic is the central core of the romance. You know, is one of these people, you know, I mean, in Cordelia and James's case, the dynamic is she loves him. He thinks he loves somebody else, and they are friends, but there's this tension between them of this unspoken thing in which she has feelings about him that she is unwilling to express to him for obvious reasons. And he has these very confused feelings where he's in love with Grace, but he has these feelings for Cordelia and doesn't really know how to deal with them. And that is a dynamic I hadn't written before. I've never written a book actually in which our main heroine is in love with a guy who's in love with somebody else. And so that you know, particular dynamic of unrequited love and, you know, misunderstanding and whatnot wasn't something I had done before, which is what attracted me to it. I think that, and I don't know if this is, you know, the same for you, but I think for a lot of writers, we're attracted to a thing we haven't done. Right? Like we tend to not like go back and do the same thing again because we already did it. And part of the fun and the challenge and the, you know, telling of the story to yourself is in doing that the first time. And so you don't necessarily want to go back and do the same thing again. You want to do something different that's going to be exciting and it's going to challenge you. You know, and there's a lot of, you know, Chain of Gold, Chain of Iron have a lot of like romances that have been fun and have challenged me. There's Thomas, who's in love with someone who was mean to him at school. With someone, and and that's not a dynamic that I had written before, where, you know, we have these two people, they have this past in which one of them has done something, you know, not so great, and I think of that as sort of, it's a new dynamic for me. There's Anna and Ariadne, where they were in love and they had a romance, and it was the big romance of Anna's life, and then Ariadne broke it off, and so now she's sort of interested in getting back together with Anna, but Anna doesn't want to be hurt again by the same person, and I haven't done that before either. And so I think it's just a matter of just being like, what's the dynamic? What's the frisson between these two people? What sparks between them, and what's the situation that they're in that, you know, will to me feel different from something that I've done before.
Well, you do it all very, very well. And as I said before, it's also very, very frustrating for readers. Something else you do very well. Well, something else you do very well in that love topic is love triangles. And I don't say that, you know, flippantly. I hate love triangles. Like, I'm just putting it out there. I'm one of those people who just don't like them. But yours really frustrate me, like I said before, because I can't hate them, you know. I'm like, why am I reading this? Why am I doing this to myself, you know? But you do them so beautifully and you do them so wonderfully that it just, you know, that I'm so invested in the read. And so one thing I think that really helps it is, so if we go back a bit to the Infernal Devices, what I really love in your love triangle between Will, Jem, and Tessa is that there was no jealousy and no bitterness between Jem and Will. And I think that really spoke to the strength of their friendship and their relationship, which was just beautiful. And so jumping forward to the Last Hours series, I really appreciated that you've done something similar with Cordelia, that she's so mature about it. She's so understanding and there's no resentment there. And I guess I would like to know, when so many young adult books use that angst and use that jealous bitterness to drive their story forward. And I think that's the part that frustrates me, because I'm like, oh, everything is so negative and stressful. Whereas yours was just like, oh, this is just really sad. You know, it's breaking my heart on their behalf. So I'd love to know why you went with that decision, and if you're aware of just how powerful it's made it because of that.
I mean, it's interesting to hear, you know, so some of it is instinctual, but I think that, you know, I like love triangles. I'm not obsessed with them, but I like them. But my best friend, Holly Black, many of you know, I wrote a whole series with her. And she's pretty well known on her own, but she hates love triangles. Oh my God, she hates them. Like with a passion of a fiery 1,000 suns. So I feel like that's kind of useful to me, because I have to write a love triangle that she will like.
Oh.
And so it's, I think about designing, you know, in my mind, you know, she's my critique partner. She reads all my books. I read her books, and, you know, we work on them together. And so for me, it's about designing a love triangle that won't piss off Holly. Yeah. So my cat is here to say hi. But Maggie, say hi. Say hi. You rotten little fuzzball. Now she ran off. False advertising. No cat. So, sorry, I was in non-cat related conversation. I think that people don't hate love triangles. I think they hate badly done love triangles, in my experience. Yeah. And I think it's really easy to make a love triangle where one character is just a villain, you know, or the feelings between two of the characters are hatred. Or I also think that with a love triangle, many people do a V. Like there's the character at the bottom, and person A loves person B, and person C loves person B, and person A and person C have no relationship. And I always feel like that's a big problem with love triangles, because I don't think that I can invest in them unless there is a relationship between person A and person C, as there is, you know, between Jem and Will. There's this very complex, very, you know, important, very loving relationship that's just as significant as Will's relationship with Tessa or Jem's relationship with Tessa. And they love each other, you know, so much. And they are, you know, truly like, you know, two, you know, like knit souls. And that, like, I feel like it removes that stuff that's like the jealous, like you said, jealousy, bitterness, anger, and creates really a story about the resilience of love and how it makes us better people rather than worse people. And I think that we're frustrated by triangles that seem to make the people in them worse. And I think, you know, with Chain of Iron, I've done a couple different love triangles that are sort of overlapping each other. And it's been interesting to kind of develop these new kinds of love triangles. But again, mostly, I'm not going to say with James and Grace and Cordelia, I think it was important to me that Cordelia not hate Grace, because I feel like that's always, to me, frustrating. A frustrating way, especially of depicting women and their relationships with each other, is to depict a girl who is jealous of another girl and hates her in a way that feels kind of, you know, unpleasant. And so I was like, well, Cordelia is a little afraid of Grace. Like, she doesn't know her. She doesn't she wants to understand her, but she doesn't really understand her. I think she's a little bit afraid of bothering her even. And she is sad, you know, that James seems to love Grace so much and that he doesn't love her. And I think that's normal to feel sad, but she never blames Grace. She's never bitter against Grace. She never feels that Grace is behaving badly. And she often thinks, poor Grace, you know, she must feel so much pain because James has had to marry me because of this, you know, thing where we have to save my reputation. And so this must be very painful for her. And I feel sympathy for her. And so I feel like that to me is, you know, is significant in the sense that, like, you know, I feel like, you know, it helps us sympathize with Cordelia and even regard Grace as we must, as a human being with a complicated story and a complicated past who has reasons for the things that she does. And like, no one involved in any of the love triangles happening in this book is a terrible person, and nobody is doing this stuff because they are, you know, to cause pain. And I think that is, you know, hopefully helpful in creating love triangles that people who don't like love triangles don't mind so much.
It certainly worked for me. I don't know, it was awful, but in a beautiful way, because you just,
I mean, like, see, that's what I like about love triangles. They create, you know, opportunities for terrible angst and pain, even if the people in the actual story aren't angry at each other.
Yep. Yeah, I don't even want to talk to you about it, and about the ending of Queen of Iron as well. And so anyway, we're not even going to go there. Speaking of Grace, I'd like to touch on that for a moment. We mentioned before about how you've got this incredibly amazing cast of characters. So we talked about the ones who've come from previous books and we love, but in this book, as you've already said, there are so many new characters or new main characters to love. So the Merry Thieves, you've got Cordelia and Lucy and Anna, who, as you said, is just this sensational, amazing character, and Jessie, and just there's so many characters to fall in love with. But on the other hand, you have these characters who are less than likable. Let's call them complex, because unlikable isn't a very nice word, but they are unlikable, but they're also very complex. So people like Alistair, who you've already said, you mentioned, Tatiana, Charles, but also very much Grace as well. So I would love to know, I guess, why it's important for you, because the thing is, even though we don't necessarily like these characters, you've managed to humanize them and make it so that we sympathize with them, or we understand that, okay, so there is three-dimensionality to these people, and they're not just evil or awful for the sake of being awful. They have their reasons. So I would like to know, I guess, why it's important to you to bring them in as real people and to make them relatable, and yeah, if you can speak to any of that at all.
That is a very complicated question, but very interesting. I mean, I think that we are often drawn to characters who fall into sort of a gray zone of morality. I mean, Tatiana's pretty bad. She has her reasons. She has her. I'm trying to not be spoilery. She has her. They're not all entirely solid reasons, but I mean, she certainly has suffered terrible trauma and pain in her life, and that sort of it does not excuse, but somewhat explains her actions. I think we learn a lot more about Grace in this book, and I think there's something that's people who are solidly good people like Cordelia, like Lucy, are lovely to write. They don't have as many. We don't have as many questions about them. I think, like, why do they act the way that they act? It's because we're like, well, they're trying to do the right thing. We understand that. Most of us are there. People who don't appear to be trying to do the right thing, we have a lot of questions about, what is driving this? Why they act the way that they act? I mean, Cordelia finds out something about Alistair in Chain of Gold that she did not know. And then she finds out another thing about Alistair that she did not know. I will talk about one of those things, which is that she did not know that their father is an alcoholic, and that Alistair has spent most of his life since he was a little boy kind of trying to cover up for his dad, going out, bringing him home when he's drunk in the gutter somewhere, hiding the amount that he's drinking, trying to protect Cordelia specifically against ever having to know about this thing. And I think it's interesting because when we have characters like Grace or like Alistair or Charles, they have all of these characteristics that sort of go this way. They're rude, abrasive, in Grace's case, fairly immoral, controlling. And so then I think what's interesting about characters like that is then you bring in something that cuts against that, right? So you have all of these things with Alistair. He's rude, he's obnoxious, he's secretive, he was mean in school, he's kind of a jerk, and doesn't seem to be very nice to Cordelia. And then you come, and you find out this thing, like, actually he spent his whole life protecting Cordelia against this information that he felt would hurt her. And I think what's fun about those kind of characters is that, you dig into them a little bit more and you find out things that cause you to recast them in your mind. And suddenly you go back and you look at the things that they did and you're like, wait, I'm looking at this in a different way than I was looking at this before. Like, oh, I see why this person said this thing. I see why they did this thing, and the first time that I saw it, I thought, what an asshole. And then the second time you're like, oh, that's about this. And I think that that's often the way that we feel. I mean, like, getting to know people in real life. And I think that that is one of the fun kinds of things about characters like that, is that you often are going back to look at their actions once you learn more about them. And you're like, oh, actually, this causes me to look at this character in a different way. Even if you still don't like them, it's fine. You don't have to like them, but it is a way of, making, I think, them more interesting. And to me, that's the most important thing, is the characters that seem like real people and are interesting.
It's true. And even from the reader perspective, it's so lovely to, once those things start to unravel and you start to get those answers about why they are the way they are, when you go back and reread, you can see it all the way along and you're like, oh, that makes sense. I get it now the whole way along. And you see them in a completely different light, as you said. So, which is beautiful. Characters are fantastic, and you do your characters so well. So I could talk to you about characters forever, but I'm not going to. I want to change. This is purely a curiosity question, and it's something I've always wanted to know about your books. It's probably a really simple answer, but at the beginning of your chapters, you have a quote. And so, I've always been curious, do you have like a treasure trove of quotes in your house, and before you start writing a book, you go and pull out the ones you think you'll use and then you plan your story around them? Or do you write the whole story and you go back and find a quote that might work with each chapter? Or something else?
When I only do it in the historicals, not in the modern day, but initially, when I started doing it in Infernal Devices, it was because Tessa was such a big reader and Will was such a big reader, and I felt like there was a certain value in sort of sharing the kinds of things that they would have read and been familiar with and would have liked with the reader. And, they do talk about reading poetry, and poetry in the Victorian era was very popular. It was sort of like song lyrics now. So everybody would know these poems and everybody would be able to recite them to each other. And so I sort of thought there was something fun and about being able to kind of share that with people. And also, I love poetry, and I constantly run into people, including my own editor. I'm looking at you, Karen, who are like, I hate poetry. And I'm like, but if you like song lyrics, you like poetry. If you've ever heard a song lyric that like meant anything to you, you do like poetry. You've probably been forced to read terrible poetry in school, and now you think you hate it, but you don't. And I always loved it. And so it's also partially like I'd like to share, the things that I love, with my fans. So I do actually have many books in which I have written down the poetry that I like. And so initially I went to those and sort of poked through them. A lot of Tennyson, a lot of Swinburne. That's the big Victorian poets. But, it's true that, now, I continue to do it, but sometimes I won't have a poem for a particular chapter. And so I'll have to kind of go looking, which is also fun because it's a way of discovering like kind of new poetry that I didn't know about before. And that's always really enjoyable for me. So I don't know. As far as I know, no one has complained to me about the inclusion of the poetry.
I love it. It's sort of, I don't know. As a reader, I really enjoy it. So I'm sorry about your editor, but as a reader, I enjoy it.
I don't think she was complaining specifically about the poetry that I was putting in my books. She was asking a not dissimilar question. She was sort of like, "Why are you doing this?" Okay. And I was like, "Well, I love poetry and I want to share with people." And she was like, "I hate poetry." I was like, "Oh, no. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you don't edit any poetry books."
Well, I love it, and it makes it even more real because you know that it's a fiction that we're reading, but at the same time, I don't know. I really appreciated it. So, and I'm sure you have scores of readers everywhere who did as well. So I'm going to jump on a bit because I know I could go down a rabbit hole of asking you a whole heap of writing and editing and other related questions, but instead I want to ask some things a bit more general. So you are arguably one of the most famous authors in the world. Congratulations. I believe the Wall Street Journal called you the new Queen of Fantasy. So I'm actually a bit disappointed that you're not wearing a crown right now, which is your prerogative. I really feel like that should be.
I do not own a crown. I have a sparkly headband that I have been known to wear.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I should have worn it.
You should have worn it, and we have to graduate you up to that crown because, you're the queen now. But I guess I would like to know, especially as an author, but just in general, how much pressure does that make you feel, especially with each new book that you release? Does it get easier? Does it get harder? Do you have that expectation of thinking, well, people, they want something good from me? How does that feel with each new book?
I think it's always, I don't know. Okay, rewind that a little bit. I feel like regardless of what level of sort of commercial success or even critical success you achieve as a writer, you always have those concerns. You always think, are my readers going to like this? Is this going to be something that, they're going to feel like this is, that I've really put the work in, that I've created something that's worthy? Is this going to engage their imagination? And there's a, what's that saying? There's a good book makes you want to live in it. A great book gives you no choice.
Beautiful.
And so you're always like, did I write that great book? Did I write that book that gives you no choice but to live inside it? And that's the challenge, that you set yourself every single time. And I don't think that there's a formula for feeling like, oh, okay, I did that before and people seem to like it, so I'm just going to do it again and it's going to be great. Every book is its own challenge, every book is the hardest book you've ever written. I mean, I certainly know that for me. I'm always like, this book is the worst. Why did it have all these problems? Why did I make these decisions? And my friends are like, you say that every single time. And I'm like, I know this to be true about my friends because they do it too. So I know it must also be true about me. I don't think there's ever any time that you feel like you're just like, I rest on my laurels. You're always sort of pushing yourself, challenging yourself, and always worrying, is this book going to be the one where people are like, I don't like it.
Yeah. Well, luckily for you, I don't think you've had one of those yet. So, everything is
probably coming.
No, knock on wood or something. Staying in that same kind of frame, if you could go back, 14 years to 2007, I think that was when City of Bones first released. So if you could whisper one piece of advice to yourself just before your first book came out, what would you say?
Oh my gosh. I think I would tell myself not to. I'm trying to think. It's a good question.
Put you on the spot.
It's interesting because sometimes there are some things where I feel like you have to go through them to know them, to like live, to like experience them, to learn. And so you're sort of like, well, what do I go back and tell myself? Are there learning experiences that I could have done without? I guess I would probably tell myself a couple different things. I think I would tell myself not to be so hard on myself because I definitely was, I still am, but like, that one book doesn't define you, because when City of Bones came out, I was like, well, either this book does okay, or I will never be a writer. And that's not really true. There are many people I know whose first couple books didn't, do well for this reason or another. And then they found the book that was successful, or the book of their heart, or whatever. So I would definitely go back and tell myself, one book won't make or break you. Your career, people say life is short, life is long. And, it's worth not telling yourself that each individual book is a thing that will either, make your life or ruin it, because that's rarely the case. Careers span years and they have ups and downs, and that's okay. Things will go up, things will go down, they'll go back up. I think that's probably what I would tell myself.
Oh, that's really lovely. And I think a lot of people will appreciate hearing that too. So your career trajectory, everything has been amazing. You've had prior to COVID, a lot of encounters with fans. And so I guess if you could pick one of your most memorable positive fan experiences, does anything come to mind?
I mean, I've had so many really nice experiences with fans. They're lovely. I really do miss seeing fans in person and meeting my readers. I remember a dad wrote to me like back in, must have been 2009 or so, and he was talking about his daughter who had been in an accident. She was really sick. She was in the hospital. Was there anything I could do? So I sent her like City of Glass before it had come out, because I was like, well, she shouldn't have to wait for it to be published. And he was so nice, and we wound up chatting, and I sent her, more stuff. And then I started sending her all of the books early. Aww. And then finally one year I got to Toronto, which was where she lived, and she and her dad came out to meet me, and they brought the whole family with them. Like they, brought his wife, he brought his mom, her grandparents were there, and they all knew who I was. And they were like, you're the nice person who's been sending her all these books. And it was just this really lovely experience of feeling like you could reach out through your books and become part of somebody's family. And it was really lovely. So I always remember that.
That's beautiful. Do you find that because Chain of Iron is releasing in the middle of this pandemic, and obviously everything you're doing is virtual, is it, you're not getting that fan experience and you're not getting to interact with your readers, but do you find that, there are obviously pros and cons of a virtual tour, and so you're a lot more accessible to people who wouldn't normally be able to see you, Is it the kind of thing that going forward into the future you'd be interested in doing, like a hybrid tours, like partly virtual, partly real, once COVID is over, obviously?
Are you my publicist? You sound like my publicist.
Paying me. No.
I think we're all thinking about that, right? You know, as authors, especially those of us who don't want to put trousers on, and no one will ever know whether you're wearing them or not.
Yeah.
It's a mystery. But I think yes, in the sense that what I do like about it is it does make you as the author more accessible to people who wouldn't normally get to see you. Exactly. Like, you know, my fans who are all across the world can log into any of these events and kind of get to see what the book event is like. And, you know, and often, you know, sometimes they're live, sometimes they're not live, but when they're live, they'll get a chance to ask questions and they'll get a chance to see other fans and see what their questions are and kind of get to experience, you know, geeking out about books with other people, and all of that stuff is great. I mean, I do think that that we are learning a lot about, you know, and we may have been forced into this position of doing these virtual tours, but I think that, you know, we are learning a lot about accessibility and the importance of it and what it means. And I think that it will be normal to do hybrid tours in the future, I would imagine. I mean, my publisher's going to send me out on the road as soon as they possibly can. I know them. So they will pull a bus up to my house and away we will go. I won't even know where we're going. Yeah. But I would be surprised if we didn't work in some virtual events, you know, into future appearances, because, you know, you can go around the country and meet people in person, which I also think is important. I think there's a real significance into having that personal, you know, relationship and contact. But I also think that, you know, there's now a real realization you can't go everywhere, you know. US is a big country, Australia is a big country. You can go to every single possible place. And so, you know, I think that there's always that feeling for the people who aren't in a city that you're going to, of like, oh, I'm missing out. And so this is a way to avoid that. Like, you can go to some places in person and then you can do an event and see, and anyone who's in, you know, in the world can come and see you. So I would bet that I feel the future holds hybrid events. That's my prediction.
I would put money down on that with you. So I'm going to keep moving on because I still have a heap of questions and we are running out of time. I'm going to get this one out of the way, but it's a bit different to what I'm hoping you're used to. So you get asked about screen adaptations a lot. Obviously, you have City of Bones came out as a movie, then the Shadowhunters TV show. So you get asked this a million times, what's happening with all your past books, your future books, everything like that. So I'm not going to ask you that. I figure if people want to hear about that, you've got a million interviews everywhere that will answer that. Instead, I'm going to throw you a bit of a difficult question. But if you've answered it before, then it'll be easy. But if you haven't, you can take a moment to think. Okay. If you had to pick one book or series that isn't yours that you would love to see adapted to TV, and you can only pick one, and maybe we should rule out all of your friends that are authors so that you don't so they're like, why did you say my book? What would you personally love to see adapted?
Okay, let me mentally rule out friends, people I know. That is really interesting because I'm like running through the things that are my favorites, and a lot of them have been adapted, you know.
Or you could say something you'd want to be adapted again if you didn't particularly love the way it was adapted.
I would like to see them do Artemis Fowl properly. That would be nice.
Yeah.
And ditto Percy Jackson, which I feel like did not get in any way a useful or faithful adaptation. So if you're just going to ask me about adaptations that suck, I could talk on for a long time. But I'm going to see Tomi Adeyemi's Children of Blood and Bone.
Oh, yeah.
Love to see that adapted. And I don't know Tomi, so I think that's fair. Yep. But I think they're such beautifully visual books that they would make a really wonderful adaptation. I'd love to see that.
It's so cinematic. I completely agree. I think that would be beautiful. All right, cool. Now I've got the movie question out of the way, even though it wasn't even what everyone's like, but wait, we want to know about this. I'm going to ask you some quick answer questions so that we can wrap up-ish. I say lightning round. I say these are quick answers. Whatever comes to your mind straight away, because they may not be quick answers, but let's go with that. So who was your first ever fictional crush?
Oh, that's really good. Aragorn.
Oh, good one. Oh,
I know. He was very hot, and he had a lot of mysterious stuff going on, and I think he gave rise to my love for men with like 6 or 7 different names.
I agree with that one. He's very worthy of a fictional crush. I don't know anyone who wouldn't agree with you on that. If you have, I don't know if you have any fangirl tendencies, but if you do have fangirl tendencies, who is one person in the world who you would kind of freak out about meeting?
I mean, they're all writers. It's all writers. I think. I'm like, oh, I mean, like, I'm sure I would freak out if I met Beyonce. I would freak out and lie on the ground. But in terms of like, oh man, okay, let me think. Oh, I've never met Neil Gaiman. I would love to. I love all of his books, and I read them when I was a little kid. And I continue to read them now, so that would be great. I have been lucky enough to meet some of my big, fiction crushes, like Tamara Pierce. Loved her books when I was a teenager. Finally got to meet her. She was super nice, so that was really awesome. Let me think. God, I'm terrible at coming up with this kind of stuff.
I know. Right, I can't do it on your end either. Yeah.
Stephen King. I would like to meet Stephen King. I love his books. I think he's highly. He is. I'm not gonna say he's not appreciated, but I feel, he writes genre, and for a long time, I feel like he did not get the critical props that he deserved and given that he is an immensely skilled writer, and his book on writing, even if you don't like horror, if you don't want to read Stephen King, totally cool. But if you are interested in writing, if you read on writing, it's one of the best writing books I've ever read.
So true. Well, you may have already answered this with one of the answers you just gave, but if you could have coffee with one author, but I'm going to add in they can be dead. So someone who's dead or alive, one author in the entire history of the world, who would you pick?
Well, if they can be dead, I would definitely have coffee with Oscar Wilde because I think he would be hilarious. I have a lot of questions, unanswered questions. I would bother him.
That'd be brilliant. All right, this is related to your books. If you could be transported into any one of the books that you've created for one day with the guarantee that you will survive the day and return home afterwards, I feel like that's to be added. Which book would you go into and why? And maybe what would you do there?
I'd probably go into Chain of Gold, actually. I really love the time period, and so I would just love to be in 1903 London. And I would probably, I would drop by to see the characters, had in a non-dangerous situation, when they're having a picnic in the park kind of thing, see how they're doing. And then I would that picnic didn't end well, but it started okay. Yeah. And before the demon attack. But then I would just kind of run around the city because I would want to see Tower Bridge, and I would want to see the Royal Albert Hall, and I would want to see all of the things that were new in 1903 and watch people going up and down the escalators at Harrods because they'd never seen an escalator before. And I would want to, kind of look at the art and just even street art and posters and advertisements and all of that. I would just want to soak up the atmosphere of what it was like to be there in 1903 in England.
Oh, awesome. I think that would be amazing too. So if you, I think this is my second last question. If you were a mundane with the site, you may well be, but let's say if you were, would you rather have a best friend who was a shadow hunter or a warlock, a werewolf, a vampire, a demon, a ghost? Pick your supernatural best friend.
Oh, I probably want a best friend who was a shadow hunter because they could protect me from any baddies that were lurking in the supernatural underground. Because I was a mundane with the side, which I'm not. Definitely not. I wish I was. I always meet people who are like, I've seen a ghost. And I'm like, I've never seen a ghost. Why will a ghost not visit me? I'm here. But oh man. I once was house sitting Holly's house while she was away on tour. She has a tower in her house. Every morning I would wake up and the door to the tower would be open and I would know that I closed it the night before. So I was like, this is so exciting and there's definitely a ghost. And so I put down some baby powder and then I called Holly and I was all excited. I was like, I think there's a ghost in your tower, so I'm putting down this baby powder and I'm going to see if there's any like, ghost tracks or anything. She was so mad. She was like, you cannot harass the ghost that lives in the tower.
Oh, no.
Leave the ghost alone. So I was like, man, that was my closest ghost encounter. I was ghost blocked.
Oh, I love that. Did that inspire in Chain of Iron with the window with James, or was that completely
yes. I finally got to write about ghosts more in Chain of Gold and Chain of Iron. So, yeah, I think so. Right, James is waking up in the morning and he doesn't know like who has opened the window overnight. So I think it's a good point. Probably was related. At least he gets to find out what was going on. I still don't know.
That's true. If only you could go back and put more of that powder down. Similar to that last question, if you could be best friends with one of your characters in your entire book, every collection, one character only, and they're your best friend for like all of eternity, who would you pick?
Oh, Magnus, definitely Magnus.
It would have to be Magnus, wouldn't it?
I know. I feel like, there are many characters I would want to be friends with, and I love all of them, and I feel like Tessa and Simon are really more like me. Lucy too. Lucy's a writer. Tessa loves reading. Simon gets instantly killed the moment he enters the Shadowhunter universe, which definitely happened. Relatable. But like Magnus I feel would be an inspiring best friend. Like I would love to go shopping with him. I feel like he would tell me what looked good and what didn't, which very useful. And he would be honest. And I feel like he would know all the cool places to go, and he could introduce me to awesome, fairy boutiques and stuff like that. But like, I just one of the things I love about Magnus and that was fun about writing him is he just is at home in himself. He has self-confidence, not in an annoying way. I think that he is somebody who is content with who he is and thrives. And I love that about him. And so I think that would be a fun thing to be near.
Yeah, I agree. He would be fantastic. All right, we're going to kind of end there because you have to get on with your life, but I just want to circle back around. So Chain of Iron is just released. It's the second book in the Last Hour series. So you obviously have the third book in that coming out next, along with a very final Shadowhunters World series, which is very sad, but also I can't wait for it personally, but sad for everyone. But you also have an adult fantasy series coming out too. So what would you like to tell us to get us even more excited about these things before we log off?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that's right. The Shadowhunters world will end with the Wicked Powers, which takes place after the events of the Dark Artifices, and sort of brings to a close the story of the Shadowhunters that we know, the Shadowhunter universe, the various families and characters and magic. So that will be both fun and very, I think, sad for me to write. So I'm excited about that, and I hope you guys are too. And then Swordcatcher is my first adult novel. It is a high fantasy, so more Lynette's kind of jam, in which but I've never done anything like this before, so it's been really fun. It means you create your own whole world, as Tolkien did, and you're sort of peopling it and creating history and creating countries and whatnot. And it takes place in a city called Castellane, which is sort of the epicenter of like trade in its world. It's right between what would be like the Silk Roads and the ocean. And so it is a melting pot of people from all over this world. And it contains, slightly evil princes, hot poisoners, some cool assassins, some criminals, some royalty, some people who move between those worlds. It's kind of an examination of power, what power is, what it means to have it, what it means to want to take it. And I'm really enjoying writing it, and I love the characters, and I hope that you will love them too. And also hot poisoners.
I mean, you had me at hot poisoners. I mean, come on. When is this book ready?
I'm still doing my poison research.
Oh,
I'm writing it. It's nearly done, but it is true that I've ordered a lot of books on poison in the past year, and I'm a little concerned about what my postman thinks.
I mean, I've got no words of comfort for you for that. So,
writers always, we have the worst search histories.
Yeah. We'll send you nice in prison. You'll be fine.
It's all like, how do I stab someone to death? You know, like, where should I aim?
Yes. How do I get rid of this body in the most non-obvious way possible? You'll be fine. I feel like you probably looked up all those things and you're not on any kind of radar. Or if you are, they're like, she's obviously a writer. So
fingers crossed if they ever come for me. I'm just like, here's all my books. If you read them, you will understand. And they'll be like, we don't read all of that.
I'm innocent. I'm innocent. Awesome. Well, okay. Well, before we go, is there anything you'd like to say to your Australian readers watching this?
Wow. I have not gotten a chance to go to Australia and tour for a good amount of years now. The last time I was there was in 2015. I was there with Holly, when the first Magisterium book came out, and I got to go to Brisbane and Sydney and meet some readers, and that was wonderful. So I guess what I would say is that, you know, this pandemic has really sort of reminded me of how much I like to travel and meet my readers in different parts of the world. I think the enforcedness of being at home and not being able to do that is a real sort of, you know, it recollects to you the significance and importance of travel and what it means to meet people from different parts of the world. And all that I am saying is that I would love to come back to Australia and tour and see you guys and be there in person. My Australian fans are some of the most fun, hard partying, and hilarious fans I have ever met. I still have a bunch of, I did an event at a bookstore and we had a jar full with the questions, and I kept a whole bunch of them because they were so funny, but I still remember one that was from some guy who was there and he was like, I don't know who you are. I came with my girlfriend and I hope I get sex after this.
Oh, no. Not even a question.
Now more of a comment. I was like, okay, I hope things work out for you.
Maybe he was hoping you'd do like a shout out and he'd get like boyfriend points.
I was like, okay, good luck, buddy. Yeah. Maybe he read my books, but
well, maybe he has now.
He might have. You never know. No. We had a shadow hunter ball. There was a party. We had a good time. It was awesome, and I would love to come back.
Oh, fantastic. Well, to everyone watching, don't forget that you can buy Cassie's new book, I'm trying to get it in the screen, Chain of Iron, now from booktopia.com.au. Thank you for watching us, but also Cassie, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. For me, it's been such an honor to speak with you, and I wish you the best with the rest of your tour and all your books coming up. I cannot wait. So I would like to request that you go straight back into your writing hole and just get them all done so that we can see them.
I mean, you know, there's not a lot else to do, so I probably will do that. And it's lovely to meet you, lovely to talk about writing. And yeah, hopefully maybe when I make it to Australia, you'll be able to meet up.
I would love that. Well, look forward to it when your publicist shoves you onto that bus.
Oh yeah, and drives me to Australia.
Awesome.
Right, bye guys.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.